The story begins with a scene of cold, aristocratic rejection, where a man's silhouette dominates the frame, his words slicing through the air with the weight of finality. He declares, with zero ambiguity, that he possesses absolutely no intention of harboring affection for the woman standing before him, regardless of her title as his wife. This stark pronouncement serves as the grim punctuation mark to the life of Melfina von Crawford, a woman whose existence has been defined by isolation and familial disdain from her very first breath. The scene shifts to the architectural grandeur of a noble estate, yet the atmosphere remains stifling. Flashbacks reveal the origins of her ostracization. Born amidst a scandalous labor during a theater outing, her arrival into the world was not met with joy, but with suspicion and scandal. Her parents, obsessed with the purity of their noble bloodline, scrutinized the infant Melfina, finding her foreign hair and eye color to be damning evidence against her legitimacy. The visual narrative emphasizes the disparity between the parents and the child, their gazes heavy with doubt as they question her parentage. This wedge drove deeper with the birth of a younger brother who bore the quintessential traits of the family, effectively sealing Melfina's fate as the unwanted outlier. Despised by her mother and marginalized by her father, Melfina grew up in the shadow of their contempt, her physical appearance serving as a constant reminder of their unfounded doubts. The culmination of this lifelong rejection manifests when she turns 16. Treating her as a cumbersome object to be discarded, her parents force her into a carriage, swiftly arranging a political marriage to rid themselves of her inconvenient presence. They inform her, without a shred of warmth, that her fiancé has been decided, sealing her future in the blink of an eye. The narrative lens focuses on the prospective husband, Duke Alexis of Ordland, a man whose reputation precedes him throughout the capital. Celebrated for his striking features and heroic exploits against monsters, he stands as the head of a ducal house with ties to royalty, making this union a matter of national celebration. Yet, despite the public fanfare surrounding the marriage of a powerful southern marquis's daughter to the northern ruler, the reality behind closed doors is frigid. Alexis, a man who seized power at a young age, presents a facade of icy detachment. In a private confrontation, Alexis outlines the barren terms of their union. He demands she not waste his time seeking affection, explicitly stating he expects nothing from her beyond her signature on paper. He frames the marriage as purely political, granting her the freedom to live as she pleases, whether attending salons or retreating to the countryside, provided she maintains the dignity of a duchess and stays out of his way. Melfina interprets this directive with cynical clarity. She is an eyesore, tolerated only if she remains invisible. She accepts this cold logic with a resigned acknowledgement, observing the man who is ostensibly her husband. Melfina scrutinizes Alexis, noting that despite his legendary status, he appears to be a man defined solely by his aesthetics in this moment. The narrative swiftly chronicles the whirlwind of nuptial formalities, a 2-week carriage journey from the capital, an engagement ball, and the wedding itself, all passing in a blur of exhaustion. Yet, sensing the long, treacherous road of marriage ahead, Melfina decides to seize control of the negotiation. She halts the Duke's dismissal to confirm the terms of their arrangement, her posture shifting from passive acceptance to calculated strategy. She clarifies the terms: total autonomy to attend social functions, freedom of residence, and a guarantee of non-interference from the Duke. Alexis, seemingly bored but agreeable, consents. However, Melfina presses further, addressing the critical issue of succession. She acknowledges his lack of desire to touch her and bluntly inquires about an heir. Alexis reveals his intent to designate his capable nephew, the son of his late-night brother, as his successor, thereby nullifying the need for biological children between them. Seizing this opening, Melfina proposes a formal waiver of all marital obligations to prevent future conflict, effectively securing her physical autonomy. With the social and physical boundaries established, Melfina plays her final card. She demands ownership of a specific tract of land, the Enka region, a remote territory encompassing Lake Mortrel on the edge of the Duke's domain. Alexis questions her choice, baffled by her desire for such an isolated area. Melfina argues for a quiet life, desiring formal ownership to prevent being displaced at a whim later. She assures him she will respect his position and govern the land without mistreating its people, simply asking for the rights to the seemingly valueless territory. Alexis, seeing no strategic loss, grants her the Enka region. As the agreement concludes, Melfina reflects on the strangeness of fate. She observes Alexis, realizing he likely has a preconceived, erroneous notion of who Melfina is, despite them having only met days prior. Internally, she reconciles her past efforts with her present reality. She recalls working tirelessly to master noble arts, etiquette, dancing, embroidery, music, desperate for her parents' acknowledgement, only to face a wall of indifference. She had once clung to the hope that a husband and children would provide the love her parents withheld, believing that diligence would eventually yield happiness. However, that illusion shattered during the journey to the Ordland domain. The narrative rewinds to the pivotal moment of change. An accident occurred a week before the wedding while traveling from the capital. In the chaos of the crash, Melfina regained memories of a past life in Japan, fundamentally altering her perception of the world. Awakening from the trauma, she found herself surrounded by concerned attendants, but her mind was already processing a new reality. She recognized her world not merely as a kingdom, but as the setting of an otome game she once obsessed over, Maria of the Heart Kingdom. In this game, Melfina von Crawford is not the protagonist but the villainess of Duke Alexis's Northern Route. The game lore dictates that Melfina, appointed as the court tutor to the heroine Maria, becomes consumed by jealousy. She mocks Maria's commoner origins and bullies her, eventually leading to a public downfall where Alexis divorces her after revealing they never consummated the marriage. The game's epilogue for Melfina is grim. She is exiled to a remote convent in a land of eternal blizzards, while Maria melts the Ice Duke's heart. Armed with this foreknowledge, the new Melfina deconstructs the character she is meant to be. She realizes the game's villainess was likely a broken woman who tried desperately to live up to her noble rank, only to have her hopes crushed by Alexis's coldness. Melfina refuses to weep over this predetermined tragedy. Instead, she resolves to use the 2 years before the heroine Maria appears to build a sanctuary for herself in Enka, rewriting her ending from tragedy to independence. The journey to Enka highlights the harsh transition. The kingdom of Francesca is naturally cold, but the northern Ordland domain is biting, with winter clinging desperately to the land even in early spring. Melfina gazes out the carriage window, the wind chilling her skin, acknowledging how far she has come from her ordinary life in Japan. She travels with Marie, a maid assigned to her by the Ordland household. Marie is quiet, refined, and efficient, traits that lead Melfina to suspect she might be of noble birth herself, perhaps serving as a watchdog for the Duke. However, Marie denies any engagement or ulterior motives with a stoic dedication to service. Melfina attempts to release Marie from what she views as a sentence to exile, suggesting the maid return to the capital to enjoy the social season. She argues for her own self-sufficiency, a trait carried over from her modern past life. Marie, however, staunchly refuses, declaring her duty is to serve Melfina, regardless of the location. This loyalty, though puzzling to Melfina, is accepted as they approach their destination. Enka reveals itself as a desolate frontier. It is an undeveloped region bordered by the massive Moraruru forest and Lake Morum, a place so remote that even greedy magistrates avoid governing it. The manor Melfina negotiated for is a dilapidated structure, reflecting the neglect of the region. Despite the bleak surroundings, Melfina steps out, undeterred. She is accompanied by Cedric, a handsome young knight who, in the game's lore, is the commander of the Royal Knights and a capture target. In this reality, he is merely her guard, seemingly demoted to watching the villainess. The arrival is a bustle of activity. 3 hired hands, Ed, Rad, and Cliff, assist with unloading the carriage. Melfina, embracing her role as the new landowner, immediately directs the cleaning efforts. She orders the windows open to air out the musty interior. When Cedric attempts to intervene or assist excessively, Melfina asserts her authority, instructing him to stick close but allowing the laborers to handle the heavy lifting. She promises to pay the workers for their extra time, a gesture that lights up their faces with gratitude. Melfina takes charge of the logistics, sending the men to the village to procure fresh ingredients, vegetables, eggs, seasonings, milk, and meat, while she and Marie inspect the kitchen. She plans to interview and hire permanent staff later but needs immediate help to make the manor habitable for the night. The kitchen inspection reveals a pleasant surprise. Magic tools powered by mana stones serve as the stove and sink, a convenience Melfina notes is pure fantasy logic in an otherwise medieval setting. The narrative then focuses on the domestic arrangements, specifically the sleeping quarters. The manor follows a basic layout with communal spaces on the first floor and bedrooms on the second. Melfina designates the master bedroom for herself and the adjacent room for Marie, adhering to the maid's status as a senior servant. However, a conflict arises regarding Cedric. As a knight, he refuses to sleep on the same floor as the Duchess to avoid any impropriety or scandal. He insists on taking a room on the first floor, which Melfina points out is a mere storeroom. Melfina, forgetting the strict social stratification and the romance game dynamics where Cedric is a noble heir used to attention, tries to offer him a better room or a stay at the village inn. Cedric staunchly refuses, citing his sworn loyalty and the custom of guarding his charge on site. He misinterprets her concern, flushing at the implication, forcing Melfina to clarify she isn't asking him to be her lover. They settle on a compromise. Cedric will clean out the first-floor storeroom to use as his quarters, maintaining propriety. Melfina internally chastises herself for forgetting that Cedric is a target character and resolves to avoid misunderstandings. As the laborers return with supplies, Melfina spots a unique item. The meat is wrapped in a large leaf. Utilizing her item appraisal ability, she identifies it as a moonhair plant, which possesses peppercorn-scented properties that absorb moisture to preserve food. The locals explain it grows naturally in the forest and is commonly used by travelers and commoners as a natural lunchbox wrapper. Melfina's modern mind immediately catalogs this as a useful resource, contrasting the local knowledge that it dries out bread with her own understanding of preservation. Melfina takes to the kitchen with unexpected proficiency. She prepares a meal using the fresh ingredients, shocking Marie by using butter, a luxury item usually reserved for nobles, for cooking. She decides to bake bread and make a soup to soften the hard, preserved village bread, recalling that the soft white bread of the capital is a closely guarded secret of noble chefs. Marie watches, noting Melfina's skill and kindness, realizing that despite her stoic exterior, the Duchess is considerate. Melfina deflects the praise, attributing her skills to a little hobby, unable to admit her proficiency comes from living alone in her past life. When dinner is served, Melfina breaks another social taboo. She invites the laborers, Ed, Cliff, and Rad, along with Marie and Cedric, to eat at the same table with her. The group is horrified by the breach of protocol, finding it presumptuous to dine with a noble. Melfina insists, framing it as practice for her new life in the country where strict noble customs are impractical. She argues that she cannot kick patrons out of a village tavern if she chooses to eat there, so she must adapt to sharing spaces. Reluctantly they sit. The first bite silences their hesitation. The soup and stir-fry are a revelation to the workers, who claim it surpasses even the famous eateries of the capital. The meal becomes a moment of shared joy, breaking down the rigid class barriers. Melfina even partakes in ale, a commoner's drink, rationalizing it as a necessity in a world with questionable water safety, contrasting it with the safe tap water of her past life. She realizes that her previous life was one of luxury compared to the survivalist reality of this world. Seizing the positive atmosphere, the three laborers boldly ask to be hired permanently. They explain they are from the same rural village and have no ties to the capital, making them perfect candidates for immediate employment. They offer their versatility, handling horses, gardening, guarding, and heavy labor, admitting they prefer the stable employment of the manor over the grueling, seasonal odd jobs of the city. Melfina, touched by their enthusiasm and need, agrees to hire them, much to their tearful delight. Marie and Cedric support the decision, recognizing the practical need for staff who are not beholden to the Duke's spies. In a final act of redefining her identity, Melfina requests that her new staff, including Marie and Cedric, address her simply as Melfina rather than by her title. The request flusters them, particularly Cedric, for whom such informality with a duchess is a severe breach of knightly conduct. However, they agree to try, cementing their loyalty to her as an individual rather than just an aristocrat. Melfina recognizes the difficulty of this request but sees it as essential for the equal footing she desires. The chapter concludes with Melfina alone in her room, writing in her diary by candlelight. She documents the events, the future that could have happened, according to the game, and her deviation from it. She reflects on the 2 years she has before the heroine Maria enters the narrative. Her goal is clear: to use this time to build a foundation of power and security as a feudal lord, utilizing the written grant of the Enka region to ensure she cannot be discarded. She resolves to reject the tragic script written for her, declaring she no longer wants the love of those who rejected her. Instead, she will forge her own happiness and peace, living freely beyond the reach of the Duke and her family. The interior of a rustic dwelling in Anchor Village, where the weight of winter still hangs heavy in the air, reluctant to yield to the encroaching spring. An elderly man with a long, flowing beard, Lutz, the village chief, stares at a missive with eyes weary from years of hardship, processing the sudden and unsettling news that the new lord is coming. The announcement sends a ripple of anxiety through the room as the villagers grapple with the logistical impossibility of the request. They question if the lord expects the manor to be cleaned by the time of arrival, a task that seems insurmountable given the season. Usually, the rhythm of noble visits is predictable, occurring in the summer to coincide with the wheat harvest, but this arrival disrupts the natural order, occurring while the frost has barely melted. The chief contemplates the state of the lord's manor, a structure that has stood dormant and unused for so long it has become a ghost in their midst. He calculates that they might be able to clean it only after the pressing labor of planting spring seed potatoes is complete, highlighting the delicate balance of survival that dictates their lives. The isolation of Anchor is absolute. Not even the local magistrate bothers to visit this forgotten corner of the kingdom, making the prospect of a lord's presence an unprecedented anomaly. Panic erupts moments later when a villager bursts in with the terrifying update that the lord is not merely coming, but is already here, a carriage having been spotted that very morning. The chief's face drains of color as the reality sets in, his mind racing to the unready state of the manor. However, The messenger clarifies that the lord's own attendants took the initiative to clean the residents themselves and are already settled in, a deviation from the expected demand for village labor that confuses as much as it relieves. Despite this small mercy, a pall of terror descends upon the room. The villagers know too well the capricious cruelty of the aristocracy, trembling at the thought of what befalls those who offend a noble. The chief admonishes them, his voice rising in fear, reminding them of the countless warnings he has issued about the terrifying nature of the ruling class, his authority buckling under the weight of the impending threat. The narrative plunges into the chief's traumatic memory, revealing the root of this generational fear. 40 years prior, a baron from the supervisory team visited the village, an event that scarred the community. The chief recalls his own father, a brave man, protesting against the injustice of a demand made during a famine. Despite crop failures and starvation, the noble had mercilessly demanded half of the non-existent harvest as tax. His fury ignited not by the suffering of the people but by the slow progress of land development. The lesson burned into the chief's psyche was one of absolute submission. To bow one's head and endure the tyranny like a passing storm, for going against a noble is a death sentence. The memory ends with the tragic image of his father sacrificing himself, leaving the village in his son's care, a legacy of survival through silence. Back in the present, the chief wrestles with the protocol of survival. He debates the timing of his obeisance, knowing that visiting a noble at the wrong hour could be construed as insolence punishable by death. He resolves to offer up his own wrinkled old neck, if it means sparing the rest of the village, a grim calculation of leadership. He mulls over the aristocrat's schedule, noting they typically work in the mornings and relax in the afternoons, making a disturbance before noon dangerous. He decides the safest course is to send a younger villager to request an audience first, planning to present himself the following afternoon. Fate, however, moves faster than his caution. Melfina appears directly at the village meeting place, apologizing for her sudden intrusion. The shock is total. The chief and his people scramble to prostrate themselves, their apologies tumbling out in a chaotic stream as they plead forgiveness for the lack of preparation and manpower. Melfina stands amidst the bowing figures, her presence commanding but her words disarming. She is accompanied by Cedric, who watches the scene with a knight's stoic observance. The chief, trembling, acknowledges her as the lady of the house, his fear palpable. Melfina wastes no time on formalities or punishments. She pivots immediately to business, stating her intention to develop the western lands and her desire to utilize the nearby serf village for this purpose. The chief is taken aback, confused by her request to discuss the matter with him first, as serfs are technically property of the village and thus subject to her will regardless. He grants her permission to proceed however she sees fit, his posture still one of abject submission. Melfina presses for details on the current labor distribution. The chief explains that the serfs are used not only for new development but also for maintaining existing fields. He assures her that the fields around the main village are manageable with the current villagers and tenant farmers, implying that the serfs are an expendable resource for her projects. However, he adds a cautious note, warning that expanding the fields would be fine, but working the serfs to death would cause trouble for the existing agriculture. Melfina absorbs this, confirming she will borrow the serf village. Her questioning then takes a sharp, pragmatic turn that baffles the elder. She inquires about the fate of the wheat straw left over after the harvest. The chief, perplexed by a noble's interest in refuse, explains it is sometimes fed to milk cows, plowed back into the earth, or simply dumped by the mountain edge if they are too busy. He mentions it serves minor utility for repairing houses, bedding, or weaving baskets, but the vast majority is treated as surplus waste. Melfina asks if she may take this waste, her mind clearly cataloging a value he cannot see. She continues her audit of the village's garbage, asking about bones and food scraps. The chief explains that pigs eat most of the scraps, leaving little behind, and bones are discarded near the straw dump. He is bewildered, assuring her it belongs to no one and is merely trash they threw out. Melfina secures his permission to take these materials as well, asking to be shown the waste site later. She reinforces her position with a gentle but firm reminder that everything in the village belongs to her, a statement the chief readily accepts. As the meeting concludes, Marie steps forward to adjust Melfina's hat, a small act of service that underscores the class difference. The villagers remain confused, wondering if the visit was a reprimand for the dirty manner, unable to comprehend a lord interested in trash and serfs. Melfina corrects the chief's address, stating she is not fond of the title, milady, and instructing him to call her Melfina. She asks for his name, and he identifies himself as Lutz. Lutz watches her leave, collapsing with relief that he is still alive. His son jokes about his father not retiring anytime soon, but Lutz realizes the storm has passed without taking anything from them. Yet, the psychological toll is heavy. He confesses that dealing with nobles shortens his lifespan and adamantly refuses to call her by her given name, the breach of protocol too terrifying to contemplate. He notes with dread that she promised to reach out again, signaling that the stress is far from over. The scene shifts to Melfina's carriage traversing the rugged terrain toward the surf village. Cedric, riding alongside or within the carriage, voices his disapproval. He argues that it is unreasonable to expect serfs to treat nobles with the proper formality, citing their lack of hygiene and etiquette. He bluntly states that the serf village is no place for someone of her station to visit. Melfina listens, internalizing his criticism but filtering it through her own perspective. She realizes that to Cedric and the world, she appears as a clueless noble girl playing at leadership on the frontier. However, she resolves not to force aristocratic customs on people she intends to ask for help. She senses the thick wall of distrust radiating from the people and knows that bridging that gap requires a different approach than the one Cedric advocates. She glances at Cedric, sensing his mixture of pity and irritation, acknowledging that while she is not acting like a proper noble, this pragmatic path is the only one she chooses to walk. The carriage arrives at the serf settlement, a collection of dilapidated structures that reflects the abject poverty of its inhabitants. Ragged children stare with wide eyes as the noble entourage disembarks. Melfina asks for a leader, requesting a grown-up, but is answered by a young boy who steps forward boldly. "I'm Rodo," the boy declares, asserting his identity. Melfina introduces herself simply as Melfina and asks the boy to tell her his name, which he repeats. In a gesture that defies all noble convention, she lowers herself to his eye level to speak with him. This action triggers an immediate recoil from Cedric, who reprimands her for kneeling in front of a serf. Melfina silences him with a sharp, "Got it," and a promise to discuss the matter later, refusing to let his class prejudices derail the interaction. Internally, Melfina acknowledges the inevitable clash between her modern values and Cedric's upbringing in a rigid class society. She admits that his perspective isn't entirely wrong within the context of this world, where authority offers protection and hierarchy is the law of the land. However, she is determined to navigate this differently. She turns her attention to a man who approaches, Nid, the actual leader of the settlement. Melfina apologizes to Nid for the sudden visit and keeping them waiting. She introduces herself formally as the Duchess of Ordland and the new lord of the Anchor region. She observes Nid's suppressed frustration, recognizing that he is only entertaining her because of her status. Nid, wary, immediately brings up the topic of taxes, stating they are far from producing enough to pay, clearly expecting the same exploitation the main village feared. He explains they have cleared some forest and flattened land, but the children have only just stopped starving with the end of winter. Melfina reassures him she is not there for taxes and promises not to make unreasonable demands. She asks simply to be shown the developed land. Nid agrees, and Melfina turns back to the boy, Rodo, calling him, "my little knight," and asking him to be her guide. Rodo, charmed and confused, asks if she is a princess. Melfina corrects him with a smile. "Not a princess, a lord." Rodo accepts this and leads the way, innocently taking her hand. This physical contact shatters Cedric's composure. He explodes in outrage, shouting that a mere serf should not lay hands on the Duchess. The outburst terrifies Rodo and the villagers. Melfina reacts instantly, stepping in to shield the boy and verbally slamming into Cedric with the full weight of her authority. She commands him to silence, declaring she will not allow him to say another word. When he tries to protest with, "But, milady," she delivers an ultimatum. If he cannot obey her orders, he is to return to the capital immediately. With Cedric cowed, Melfina turns her concern to Rodo, asking if he is hurt. She makes a light-hearted joke about him hitting his stomach to ease the tension, but the boy is shaken. Rodo insists he is fine, mentioning he has survived falls from big rocks before. He apologizes to her, assuming he has done something wrong. Melfina firmly corrects him, stating he did nothing wrong and therefore has no need to apologize. She then offers her own apology, taking responsibility for Cedric's aggression by stating that the actions of a knight under her command are the same as if she did them herself. She assures Rodo she is not mad, and he, with the resilience of a child, forgives her, calling her a kind boy, likely a mistranslation/misunderstanding of lord, or just childish phrasing. The adult villagers, witnessing this unprecedented humility from a noble, try to intervene, insisting she shouldn't be the one apologizing. Melfina silences their protests with a raised hand and a reiterated apology for the incident. She explains that since she asked Rodo to guide her, the fault lies not with him, but with her servant's rude reaction. Deciding that enough damage has been done for one day, Melfina calls for a retreat. She advises Rodo to send someone to the manor if he feels unwell later. Signaling to her team, she orders Rad to take them back. Marie closes the carriage door, sealing the scene as they depart, leaving the serfs and villagers bewildered by a lord who values trash, apologizes to children, and reprimands her own knights in defense of the lowest class. The carriage rattles as it traverses the uneven path back to the manor, the wooden wheels groaning against the earth. Inside, the atmosphere is heavy with the aftermath of the confrontation at the surf village. Melfina sits resolutely, her gaze fixed forward, determining that regardless of external opinions, she will not alter her course of action. The silence breaks when she questions Marie, asking if the maid also believes her actions were erroneous or mistaken. Melfina declares a quiet indifference to the judgment of others, her resolve hardened by the recovery of her past life memories. Marie, sitting opposite her mistress, offers a frank validation. She asserts that Lady Melfina is not wrong. However, Marie admits she never anticipated that exercising one's rights would result in someone getting hurt, alluding to the friction with Cedric. Despite her humble position, Marie provides a crucial lesson in political hierarchy. She states that this conflict is fundamentally a matter of rank. In the Anchor region, Melfina is the supreme authority. No one possesses the standing to criticize how she conducts herself within her own territory. Marie clarifies Melfina's dual status. She is the lady of the Duke's household, but simultaneously the absolute lord of the Anchor region. Marie elaborates on the geopolitical structure of their world to dismantle Cedric's earlier critique. She explains that the expectation of demure wifely behavior is secondary to her authority as a ruler. While the Duke himself might claim the right to critique her, even the royal family typically refrains from interfering with a noble's domain management. Deciding governance policies is the exclusive right of the lord. Marie details that the kingdom is comprised of powerful clans that predated the current borders, meaning each noble's land functions essentially as an independent country. Consequently, nobles hold a status essentially equal to the royal family, who maintain their power through a non-hostile alliance with these magnates rather than absolute domination. Under this framework, Marie concludes that Melfina, as the Lord of Anchor, holds the prerogative to behave like a king without fear of fault. Governance is the Lord's decision alone. Therefore, regarding the earlier dispute, Marie pronounces that Melfina is not mistaken. She flips the script on the power dynamic, stating that if a guarding knight criticizes the Lord's behavior, it is the knight who is at fault. Melfina absorbs this, realizing the root of the friction. She understands that Cedric treats her not as the autonomous Lord of Anchor, but strictly as the Duchess of Ordland. This perspective explains why he frowns at behavior that deviates from ducal norms and acts aggressively to protect her from unknown commoners. In his eyes, he is fulfilling his duty as a duchess's guard without error. Melfina thanks Marie, feeling relieved by this clarity. Marie then softens, revealing a personal connection to the day's events. She has a younger brother she had to leave behind when she entered service early. Seeing Melfina show concern for the serf boy, Rodo, touched her, as she simply wishes for boys of that age to smile carefree. The carriage arrives at the manor, where Ed, the young servant, is diligently sweeping the entrance. He greets Melfina enthusiastically, noting her early return. Melfina acknowledges his hard work, quoting Cliff's maxim that the gate is the face of the estate. However, there is no time for pleasantries. Melfina orders Ed to tend to the horse and commands Cedric and Marie to sit with her immediately. She declines Marie's offer of tea, insisting they get the conversation over with first. Inside the manor, the atmosphere is tense. Melfina initiates the discussion by seeking to confirm the narrative Cedric and Marie were fed regarding her status. She asks what the Duke told them about her. Marie, kneeling formally, confirms the rumor. She was told Melfina is the noblewoman welcomed as the official wife of the Ordland Duke. However, Marie adds a crucial nuance she heard, that Melfina stated she would not sit at the same table as her lord, implying a distance that would persist for a very long time. This belief led the housekeeper to instruct Marie to work merely as a maid during the stay, rather than as a lady's attendant. Melfina notes that the servants and knights perceive the situation through the lens of their duties, private matters versus official duties. It appears Marie and the housekeeper grasped Alexis's distant attitude more clearly than the public facade suggested. Melfina probes further, asking what they have heard from sources other than the Duke, specifically addressing the confusion surrounding her unduchess-like behavior and her desire to live in a remote region immediately after the wedding. Cedric attempts to deflect, but Melfina cuts him off, demanding honesty. She asks if he knows the rumors about her and her mother. Cedric stiffens, confirming he does. Melfina acknowledges that the story is well known among the capital's nobility, involving the Carlisle family and the court earl. She then corners him with a specific detail. She asks why he knows her family name. Cedric is taken aback, as he had only introduced himself as Guarding Knight Cedric, yet Melfina knows he is of Von Carlisle. Melfina covers her tracks, attributing her knowledge to the diligence of a marquis's daughter who keeps abreast of noble lineages, rather than admitting it comes from her past life knowledge where she completed the game on the hardest difficulty. She explains that not all knights hold noble titles, but she discerned his identity. She then addresses the elephant in the room regarding the rumors. She deduces that Cedric likely suspected the Ordland family might be behind the rumors of her being a switch child, illegitimate, in the royal capital. If he believed these rumors, she posits, he must view her as an irresponsible wife abandoning her duties. Cedric admits he hasn't doubted her to that extent, knowing that someone as straightforward as Alexis wouldn't remain calm if falsely accused. However, he confesses that maintaining the attitude of a knight serving a lady under these ambiguous circumstances is not something he holds with pride. Melfina identifies the core conflict. Their opinions will never align as long as he views her as the Duchess and himself as guarding Knight Cedric. She drops the facade, stating plainly that she is not the Duke's official wife. Cedric is stunned. Melfina clarifies that while she is the Duchess on paper, their union is a white marriage. She questions if he understands that a white marriage is treated as invalid under church law. Cedric reacts with disbelief. Melfina reinforces her claim, stating the Duke clearly told her he has no intention of touching her and did not visit her room on their wedding night. To provide irrefutable proof, she asks Marie to retrieve a document tied with a red ribbon from her bedroom desk. She presents the marriage contract, signed on the day of the ceremony, pointing out the Duke's own handwriting. She interprets his assignment of Cedric not as spousal care, but as a desire to keep a minimum level of surveillance over her. While she believes the Duke doesn't intend to divorce her at the moment, the reality of their bond is legally tenuous. Having laid out the truth, Melfina offers Cedric an honorable exit. She explains that allowing him to guard her is her way of showing sincerity while she temporarily bears the Ordland name. However, she suggests a fabrication to save his reputation. He can claim she throws uncontrollable tantrums and is impossible to guard. This excuse would allow him to return to the Duke's service without staining his record as a knight. She self-deprecatingly argues that since she is not truly the Duchess, she is not worthy of his protection. Cedric, however, refuses to yield. He clenches his fist, declaring he cannot abandon his post. He invokes his name, Cedric von Carlisle, and asserts that his lord ordered him to protect her, and he intends to obey. The argument circles back to their earlier conflict. Cedric insists he cannot protect her if she allows unverified people near her, while Melfina demands he obey her orders to allow such interactions. Exasperated, Melfina threatens to escalate the situation. She tells him she will write to the Duke herself, requesting a competent knight or even a randomly hired adventurer instead of him if he continues to wear her out. She suggests again that he should return to the capital. Faced with this ultimatum, Cedric falters, asking for a little time to think, acknowledging the harshness of being forced to decide immediately. As Cedric steps away, Melfina reflects on the hidden danger he represents, a danger known only to her through her past life. She knows this world is an Otome game. In the game's narrative, Melfina's ruin occurs specifically in the Alexis route, the storyline centered on the Duke. This world is constructed for the heroine, Maria, who is destined to arrive in 2 years. Crucially, Cedric is one of the heroine's romance options. In the game, Cedric falls in love with Maria, a love he risks his life for as the captain of the Knights. Knowing this destiny, Melfina realizes that keeping Cedric close is a massive risk to her own safety and plans. Just as Melfina grapples with this internal dilemma, Marie intervenes with a shocking request. She asks permission to speak, then formally requests to resign from the Duke's household staff. Instead of serving the Duke, she asks to transfer and work directly for Melfina here in Anchor. This declaration catches Melfina completely off guard, shifting the dynamic of loyalty within the manor once again. Melfina stood resolutely within the sun-drenched parlor, the tension in the air palpable as the dialogue shifted from casual service to life-altering decisions. To her right, Cedric, the knight whose stiff posture usually betrayed nothing, leaned forward with a sharp intensity, his composure fracturing under the weight of the conversation. He stammered, his senses having picked up on a subtle undercurrent of emotion from the maid standing before them, yet the sudden escalation left him grasping for words. Before him stood Marie, her head bowed in a display of subservience that contradicted the boldness of her request. She did not flinch as Cedric began to admonish her, his voice rising with the instinctive authority of one defending the hierarchy of the Duke's household. Marie, however, cut through the atmosphere with a quiet but devastating declaration. She announced her intention to sever her ties with the illustrious Duke's household, a position coveted by many, to instead transfer her loyalty and labor to this developing frontier. Cedric's eyes widened, his shock manifesting in a sharp interrogation, demanding to know the origin of such an abrupt and seemingly irrational proposal. The maid remained stoic, her silhouette framed against the light, maintaining her position despite the incredulity radiating from the knight. The scene shifted, diving into the intricacies of noble servitude that governed their world. Cedric, regaining his footing, began to lecture on the rigid protocols of their society. He emphasized that serving the Duke's household was not merely a job but a privilege often reserved for those with blood ties to nobility. He gestured emphatically, explaining that to even secure a place within such a high-ranking family required a solid recommender, a guarantee of character and lineage. His gaze bored into Marie, questioning if she possessed such a backer, while simultaneously dismissing the wisdom of her potential transfer. To move from the center of power to a frontier land was, in his eyes, a regression. Marie finally lifted her gaze, her expression solemn as she unveiled the truth of her lineage, a revelation that recontextualized her entire existence within the manor. She spoke of her mother, a woman who had been the former duke's second wife, a union marked by a staggering 30-year age gap. Her father, she revealed with a heavy finality, was a direct retainer of that same former duke. The complexity of her background hung in the air. She was not merely a servant but a byproduct of the complex social stratification that defined the aristocracy. Melfina listened, her mind racing as she processed the implications. The narrative moved into her internal analysis, visualizing the social ladder where the size of the household one served acted as a direct mirror to one's own status. A maid serving the ducal family wielded influence and prestige that outstripped even lower-ranked nobles, making them highly desirable marriage prospects. For Marie to abandon that elevated perch to serve a lord in a frontier land, a territory still in the throes of rough development, was a decision that defied all conventional logic. As Melfina scrutinized the maid, a visual epiphany struck her with the force of a physical blow. She observed Marie's features, the specific curve of her eyes, the texture of her hair, and then cast a glance toward the image of Alexis in her mind. The resemblance was undeniable, a biological signature written across their faces that she had somehow failed to read until this precise moment. The realization cascaded through her thoughts. Marie was not just a servant with a connection to the former duke, she was Alexis's half-sister, an illegitimate child born of the former duke and his second wife. Melfina's inner voice chastised her own lack of observation, wondering how such a blatant truth had escaped her notice for so long. The history of the Ordoland family unfurled in Melfina's mind, a tapestry of tragedy and secrecy. She recalled the rumors that whenever the father stayed at the duke's household, he brought Marie's mother, a subtle arrangement that birthed Marie. Marie then filled in the gaps of her own history, describing a childhood where she lived with her parents until the age of 5. It was only after her younger brother was born that she was moved into the duke's household, ostensibly as a maid apprentice, a role that served as a convenient cover for her true identity. She explained that her father already had older children, 2 sons and a daughter, from his first wife, further complicating the family tree. Melfina deduced the strategy behind this arrangement. In the Ordoland family, there had been no legitimate daughter until Melfina herself arrived. Alexis's mother had passed away, leaving a void in the feminine hierarchy of the house. A maid typically served the young ladies or the mistress of the house, a role distinct from the drudgery of ordinary servants. However, for Marie to be treated as a maid apprentice from the start, despite the lack of a mistress to serve, signaled a special favor, a silent acknowledgement of her blood. It was a maneuver to guarantee her a lifestyle adjacent to nobility, protecting her from the harshness of common life despite her illegitimate status. Melfina pieced together Alexis's intentions. By keeping Marie close as a maid, he intended to treat her as his half-sister in all but name. It was a protective cage, gilded but confining. Melfina looked at Marie, seeing her not just as a potential employee but as a woman caught in a web of noble obligation. She reasoned that there was even less reason for Marie to quit now. Having served for over 10 years, her departure would not tarnish her recommender's reputation, yet the timing remained suspect. Marie, however, offered a bleak picture of her personal life. Her parents were dead, her brother lived in the capital, and she was effectively estranged from the remnants of her family. Melfina's thoughts drifted to the strategic implications. Perhaps Alexis kept Marie at the manor so she could accompany him to the royal palace, or perhaps to give her a chance to see her brother if the household moved to the capital. It was a strategy to keep her within the sphere of the elite. Then, Melfina's gaze shifted to Cedric. The realization expanded. Cedric, too, occupied a mirrored position. He was a guard knight, yet his family held the rank of a court earl. As her guard, he had easy access to the palace and his family, a privilege afforded by his station. Melfina surmised that Alexis had orchestrated this as well, surrounding himself and Melfina with those of noble blood who were technically servants, creating a buffer of high-status retainers. A beautiful duchess's maid in the prime of her youth would naturally attract attention from nobles and officials, serving as a pawn in the game of alliances. A rare smirk touched Melfina's lips as she thought of Alexis. She felt a grim satisfaction, thinking he got exactly what he deserved when his carefully laid plans were upended by her move to the frontier. He likely never anticipated that she would drag both his half-sister and the earl's son to this remote, developing backwater, effectively removing them from the capital's chessboard. The conversation returned to the present. Cedric, standing tall in his uniform, looked down at Marie with a mixture of confusion and concern. He asked plainly why she sought this career change. Marie's answer was disarmingly honest. She confessed that she was simply not cut out to be a maid. She harbored a distaste for the constraints of high society, She had no desire to learn manners and education she would never actually use. The act of dressing up and standing on the sidelines, merely watching the lives of others, filled her with a profound sense of embarrassment. Marie's voice took on a wistful tone as she described the life she actually craved. While other children her age in service were working and living swiftly, she felt stagnant. She admitted to envying Melfina, not for her title, but for her spirit. Marie wanted the tactile reality of a common life, to wear simple cotton clothes, to make friends without the barrier of protocol, and to eat street food on her days off. It was a desire for authenticity over performative nobility. Melfina listened, understanding the subtext. Marie revealed that the staff tried to stop Melfina's unconventional behavior, telling her it was pointless to act like a duchess in the frontier, yet Melfina persisted in doing things herself. Marie observed that Melfina didn't mind the labor, even noting that Melfina never forced Marie to do the washing, a gesture of consideration that Marie recognized as respect for her ambiguous status. This behavior, this freedom to act unbound by the rigid expectations of a duchess, was what Marie envied. Melfina internalized this praise, her mind wandering into a philosophical critique of their society. She mused that bestowing a title of young lady on someone who isn't one is effectively an insult to those who truly hold the position. Similarly, for a noble husband to tell his wife to do whatever she wants was a dismissal, not a liberation. She looked at Marie and thought that there was truly nothing to envy in her position. Melfina analyzed Marie's romantic prospects with cold pragmatism. If Marie married a commoner, she would lower the value of the duke's household's unmarried servants. If she married a noble, she would forever be seen as a commoner servant who was merely accepted by the aristocracy, never truly becoming a duke's daughter. It was a luxurious worry, a nuisance of a golden cage. The narrative then plunged into the depths of Melfina's memory, accessing the knowledge of her past life. She recalled the 16 years she had lived as Melfina, overlaying it with the awareness that this was an Otome game world. Yet the reality was visceral. It was a world where humans lived, struggled, and died. Outside the gilded bubbles of nobility, the commoners faced poverty. The right to wear fine clothes and eat good food was a privilege won through blood or coin, not a guarantee. Melfina knew the meaning of poverty, not materially, but in spirit. A visual dichotomy formed in her mind. She pictured the original Melfina, a figure of shadows and desperate pride. The original Melfina had been unloved by her parents, holding on to her status as a noblewoman because it was the only shield she had against her loneliness. She had studied hard, acting the part she was born to play, only to be eclipsed by the arrival of the innocent and beautiful saint, Maria. The flashback intensified, showing the tragic script of the game. The original Melfina, despite her efforts and education, was rejected by the man who became her husband immediately after their wedding. In contrast, Maria, who knew nothing of noble education or etiquette, was loved by everyone, including the husband who had cast Melfina aside. Melfina visualized the game's happy ending, a silhouette of the saint and the husband united, living happily ever after, while the original Melfina was banished to a distant convent. She wondered what kind of agonizing feelings the original Melfina must have endured, hearing of that happiness from her exile. Snapping back to the reality of the frontier parlor, Melfina looked at Marie, the woman standing before her who simply wanted to define her own life. Melfina's resolve solidified. She would not perpetuate the cycles of control that defined the capital. She told Marie that if this was her wish, she did not mind. Melfina then transitioned to the practicalities of employment, her tone shifting from introspective to administrative. She asked Marie if she preferred to remain a maid or if she harbored another wish. Marie's eyes lit up with a specific ambition. She declared that she could read, write, and calculate, skills she had honed while helping the housekeeper and butler in the Duke's household. She requested, with a hopeful tremble in her voice, to become Lady Melfina's secretary. She offered to keep accounts and manage supplies, positioning herself as a logistical asset rather than a domestic servant. Melfina accepted the proposal with grace. She thanked Marie and promised to ensure her salary would not decrease despite the change in location and role. She emphasized that she definitely wanted Marie to take the job, validating the woman's worth beyond her bloodline. Marie's face broke into a relieved smile, exclaiming that it would be a huge help. The agreement was sealed. Melfina stated she was counting on Marie, solidifying the new hierarchy of their frontier life. The scene concluded with a shift in the room's dynamic. The relationship between the stiff, duty-bound guard knight and the reserved, capable maid had fundamentally altered, softened by the honesty of the exchange. They were no longer just pawns of the Duke's household, they were a team forging a new path in the frontier. And so, on that day, the foundation of Melfina's administration was laid, built not on noble obligation, but on chosen loyalty. The morning sun heralded the beginning of a new regime, the light filtering into the room where the fate of the territory would be decided. Cedric stood at attention, his demeanor shifting from the emotional turbulence of the previous day to professional rigidity as he addressed the schedule. Melfina greeted the day with a focused intensity, acknowledging both Cedric and Marie, who now stood by her side not just as a maid, but as a partner in this administrative endeavor. Their destination was set, the serfs' village, the ground zero for the first step of their grand design, managing the territory. As they prepared to depart, Melfina's mind retreated into the tactical library of her past life. She analyzed the current reality against the backdrop of Maria of the Heart Kingdom, the Otome game that dictated the underlying logic of this world. She recognized that this was no simple romance simulator, it was a trivia-heavy game where the hard mode routes demanded extensive knowledge to survive. In the original game, the heroine faced a scenario centered on agricultural reform, a detail Melfina now clutched like a weapon. She calculated the variables. To secure her own happiness and safety, her position as the feudal lord had to be absolutely unshakable. Whether the narrative followed the Cedric route or the Alexis route, she needed to be fortified before the game's events officially began. She admitted to herself that she had never managed a territory in her past life, yet resignation was not an option. She had no choice but to try, hoping her encyclopedic game knowledge would bridge the gap between theory and reality. Upon arriving at the village, Melfina immediately halted the existing operations. She commanded the serfs to stop clearing the forest, a directive that confused the laborers who were accustomed to inefficient toil. She ordered them to pivot, instructing them to only gather lumber for the time being, reasoning that cutting down thick trees was heavy work that consumed too much time they did not have. Her eyes scanned the settlement, searching for a writing desk to organize her plans, but the reality of the serfs' poverty stared back at her. The villagers explained their lack of furniture with a dull acceptance. They possessed no dining tables because they had never needed them. They simply sat on the straw-covered ground to eat their meager rations. Melfina absorbed this information without judgment, turning her attention to the map of the land. She pointed to the open scrubland, declaring that they would handle the measuring and that the serfs should till the land within the stakes her team set. She outlined the plan, fields starting from a specific point, divided into plots 20 meters wide and 50 meters long. The serfs hesitated, their confusion manifesting as polite resistance. One man pointed out that the designated area was wasteland, implying it was unfit for agriculture. He argued that even if they tilled it, the ground was hard and crops would hardly grow. Melfina countered with the confidence of modern agronomy. She explained that wasteland was easier to clear than dense forest and that she possessed knowledge of crops that thrived even in poor conditions. Furthermore, she promised to improve the soil itself, a concept that seemed alien to the laborers. At that moment, a commotion interrupted the briefing. A delivery had arrived, the scale of which left the villagers breathless. Melfina had orchestrated a logistical surge. 20 carts and 40 donkeys to pull them had entered the village. She reasoned that sending empty carts to transport goods was wasteful, so she had filled them with high-quality farming tools and seeds. The serfs swarmed the carts, their hands trembling as they touched the steel. They marveled at the sturdiness of the handles and the sharpness of the axe blades, objects of a quality they had likely never seen, let alone wielded. The realization that chopping wood would be significantly easier with these tools washed over them. Yet, fear mingled with their awe. A villager asked hesitantly if they were really allowed to use such treasures, to which Melfina replied with a pragmatic, "Of course." She explained that quality tools were essential for efficiency, though she noted internally that she had failed to recruit blacksmiths to maintain them, as few were willing to travel this far into the frontier. Melfina then gathered the leaders to discuss the crop rotation. She announced that for this year, they would not plant wheat. This sparked immediate confusion, as wheat was the staple of the realm. Melfina laid out her subversive economic strategy. Wheat was heavily taxed. She visualized the crushing cycle of the serf economy, where the lord, landowner, and middleman siphoned off almost the entire harvest, leaving the serfs with nothing but debts and a reliance on stored potatoes and beans to survive. Instead, she declared they would focus on beans and corn. She brushed aside concerns about taxes, stating they would worry about that after everyone was eating well. When a villager questioned if they were becoming livestock farmers, since corn was typically known as animal feed near the capital, Melfina placed a finger to her lips, swearing him to secrecy. She confided that corn was delicious for people too, whether roasted, steamed, fried, or in soups. The serfs watched her, their internal monologues revealing a profound cognitive dissonance. In their experience, nobles never bowed their heads to commoners. They took half the harvest, rode in grand carriages, and lived in a separate reality. Yet this lady, Melfina, stood in the dirt with them, distinct and confusingly benevolent. The operation commenced. The serfs executed a slash-and-burn technique under Melfina's direction. Fire consumed the dry brush of the wasteland, the flames spreading to the edges of the demarcated plots. Melfina commanded them to set a watch overnight to prevent the fire from spreading uncontrollably, instructing them to wait a few days after it extinguished before plowing. She emphasized the importance of safety, ordering the clearing of weeds at the edges and the placement of stones near the forest boundary to act as fire breaks. As the smoke cleared and the work began, Melfina continued to issue precise instructions. She explained the chemistry of the soil, telling them that land with tall weeds grew better crops if ash and charcoal were mixed in. She directed them to carefully mix the weed ash into the soil to neutralize the acidity and provide nutrients. Simultaneously, she ordered the construction of wooden frames near the fields, specifying dimensions that seemed arbitrary to the workers but were calculated for a specific future purpose. A young boy named Rodo approached her, asking about potatoes. He seemed disappointed when Melfina confirmed they wouldn't be planting them this year, as he had associated her promise of plenty to eat with the tuber. Melfina reassured him, promising that the corn and beans would be tasty and that he should look forward to them. Melfina's mind, however, was occupied by a darker timeline. She recalled the history of Maria of the Heart Kingdom. In the game's lore, a massive epidemic began 2 years before the story officially started. This disease devastated the surrounding countries and led to a catastrophic famine that killed countless people. The famine only ended when Saint Maria descended into the world. Melfina knew that relying on a single crop like wheat or potatoes made the population vulnerable. To combat the looming famine, she needed to diversify with alternative crops immediately. The disaster was 2 years away, and every action she took now was a fortification against that future death toll. 2 weeks later, the landscape had transformed. The slash-and-burn phase was complete, and the wasteland near the village had been turned into plowed fields. Melfina observed the progress, noting that it was moving more smoothly than she had expected. The serfs were energized by the high-quality tools. One man exclaimed that he could swing his sturdy hoe forever, finding the work easy compared to the grueling task of clearing the forest. However, Melfina noticed a disturbing trend. She asked the foreman, NID, if everyone had been taking breaks. NID confirmed they rested during lunch, but Melfina probed deeper. She realized that lunch was the only break they took. The serfs returned to work immediately after eating, pushing themselves continuously. Melfina's internal narrative dissected the systemic cruelty of serfdom. She knew intellectually that constant work was their norm because their remaining grain was often taken or deducted from future earnings, trapping them in a cycle of debt. Failure to meet harsh quotas meant penalties, and since they couldn't pay, they sold their rights to the lord. They were treated no differently from livestock, given only minimal necessities to survive. Although they could theoretically buy their freedom for 3 gold coins, the heavy taxes and debt accumulation made redemption impossible, creating generations of families born into servitude. Melfina identified this system as fundamentally unhealthy. An average person in the capital earned hundreds of gold coins, making the 3-coin ransom a pittance that was nonetheless out of reach for these people. She decided to break the cycle. She ordered NID to institute 3 mandatory breaks daily, morning, lunch, and afternoon. She commanded that anyone unwell be forced to rest, explaining that fatigue reduced productivity, a metric the serfs could understand even if they couldn't grasp her empathy. The narrative shifted to the wooden frames Melfina had ordered earlier. They were now filled with compost. Melfina explained to a skeptical Marie that this fertilizer was made from waste but didn't smell bad due to fermentation. She educated her on the process. The heat from fermentation killed off odors and pests, but moisture control was key to preventing rot. She instructed that they should start using this manure-based compost as soon as possible, mixing it into the newly plowed fields to decompose and enrich the earth. Marie, observing Melfina's tireless activity, finally intervened. She noted that Melfina had been moving since morning and urged her to rest, pointing out that it would look bad if the Lord ignored her own advice about breaks. Melfina conceded with a smile, agreeing to pause. During the break, 2 young village girls approached the bench where Melfina sat. One of them, a small child named Rena, peered at Melfina with wide, innocent eyes and asked if she was a witch. Her older sister, Ellie, panicked, apologizing profusely for the childish words and fearing retribution. Melfina laughed off the offense, introducing herself simply as Lady Mel, to make it easier for the child to pronounce. Melfina offered the children barley tea. Ellie was hesitant, but Rena drank it happily, noting the tasty brown water. Melfina felt a pang of nostalgia. The lukewarm drink tasted just like the barley tea from her previous life. She engaged Rena, asking why the child thought she was a witch. Rena listed Melfina's weird actions, gathering straw, mixing stuff, pouring water, and burning bones. Melfina used this teaching moment to explain the science of agriculture in terms a child could grasp. She asked Rena how she thought they could help crops grow big and strong. When Rena suggested sunlight and water, Melfina validated her but pushed further, asking if that was enough. She explained that just as humans get thin and weak without food, plants are the same. She described the fertilizer as food for the crops. Melfina's expression softened as she enlisted Rena's help. She told the child that she wanted everyone to eat lots and lots, and that once the crops grew, Rena, her mother, and Roto would be fed. She admitted she couldn't do it alone and needed everyone's help. Rena, beaming with the purpose of the task, agreed enthusiastically. The scene concluded with a panoramic view of the fields. The atmosphere had shifted entirely. The serfs, once drudging in silence, were now smiling as they worked. The introduction of breaks, better tools, and a leader who treated them with dignity had transformed the labor force. Rena pointed this out to Melfina, saying she was amazing for making everyone cheerful. Cedric, standing in the distance, observed the scene. His usually stoic face bore a look of deep contemplation as he watched Melfina, his internal assessment of her shifting as he witnessed the undeniable results of her unorthodox methods. However, the narrative cut sharply away from the hope of the new fields to a neighboring location. In Anchor Village, the mood was cataclysmic. An old man clutched his head in his hands, his body racked with tremors of despair. He stared at the ground, sweat pouring down his face, as he uttered a broken question into the void, "What am I supposed to do?" The juxtaposition of Melfina's success and this stranger's utter ruin hung in the air, a foreshadowing that the challenges of the frontier were far from over. The interior of a rustic dwelling in Anchor Village, where the air hung heavy with the tension of a message undelivered. Ed, a young boy with nervous eyes, stood before Lutz, the village chief, attempting to relay a communication from the new lord. Lutz, a man whose face bore the weathered lines of cynicism, dismissed the preamble, grumbling that a request from a noble was inherently a troublesome burden. He urged the boy to speak, his posture defensive. Ed conveyed the message. The lord wished to discuss a matter and offered two options. Either they would visit Lutz soon, or Lutz could come to the manor at his convenience. Lutz froze, his mind grappling with the anomaly of a noble offering a choice. In his experience, the right answer to a noble's request shifted like the wind, dependent entirely on their volatile moods. He analyzed the trap. Sometimes, dropping everything to rush to the manor was expected, yet arriving with a peasant boy could be construed as an insult. Lutz queried the boy's identity, and Ed introduced himself brightly, explaining he had been living at the manor since the other day. The chief tried to strategize, asking if he should request a specific day from the lord to minimize offense. Ed, innocent to the political minefield, suggested going right away or simply whenever the lord was free. Lutz shot this down immediately as strange, unable to comprehend a noble with free time. Ed countered, revealing that Lady Melfina was incredibly busy morning and noon, implying her schedule was packed with labor, not leisure. He noted that without Marie's intervention, the lord worked nonstop, a revelation that stunned Lutz, who believed nobles lived lives of idle luxury. Ed elaborated on the domestic reality of the manor. He described Melfina conducting complicated financial talks with her secretary, reviewing balance reports, merchant estimates, and transaction settlements in the mornings. Lutz listened, his skepticism chipping away as Ed continued. The boy boasted that Melfina was teaching him to cook and that she prepared lunch herself alongside Marie. Ed added a conspiratorial whisper that while Sir Cedric looked displeased by the breach of protocol, he ate the most of Melfina's cooking. The conversation pivoted to the lord's afternoons. Ed explained that Melfina received reports from adventurers she had hired to investigate the mountains and Molter Lake. Lutz's pride bristled. He questioned why she relied on strangers when the villagers, who had cultivated the area for 50 years, knew the land best. He felt the sting of being bypassed, interpreting it as the lord trusting paid swords over her own people. Ed, with the blunt honesty of a child, revealed he had asked Melfina that very question. Lutz turned pale, horrified that the boy had voiced such insolence. Ed recited Melfina's answer. She avoided bothering the villagers because everyone has their own work to do, and she only wished to consult them on matters money couldn't solve. This struck a nerve in Lutz. He knew some villagers were frustrated, seeing the lord provide carts and donkeys to the serf settlement while seemingly ignoring Anchor. They felt the lord favored the serfs, who appeared to be thriving under her direct intervention. Lutz, however, maintained a pragmatic view, muttering that they should be glad when nobles ignored them. Suddenly, Ed announced that since Melfina wanted to develop things quickly, they should go to her immediately. Before Lutz could protest, the door creaked open. Melfina herself stood there, flanked by Cedric and Marie. Lutz panicked, the timing catastrophic as they were about to eat lunch. Melfina apologized profusely for the intrusion, her demeanor devoid of the arrogance Lutz expected. She chided Cedric for bringing them there without confirming availability, while Cedric stoically accepted the blame. Melfina wasted no time, suggesting they finish the discussion immediately since they were already there. She turned to Lutz, validating his earlier grievance by admitting it was more reliable to ask him about the village than to rely solely on adventurer surveys. She requested a status report on the crops. Lutz, shifting into his role as chief, reported that aside from wheat, they grew vegetables and potatoes, with 70% of their fields dedicated to the latter. The discussion moved to livestock. Lutz confirmed the village population was around 200 and that they kept about 70 pigs. He explained that households with babies built fences, but otherwise, the pigs roamed free. Melfina expressed surprise at seeing pigs wandering the settlement. Lutz explained the pioneer logic. Pigs were omnivores that grew even if left alone. They were a survival mechanism, slaughtered when the snow came. If a pig damaged a field, the owner of the field was responsible for fencing it out, not the pig owner. Melfina analyzed this system instantly. It was a fence law paradigm, rooted in the belief that land settled by a pioneer group began as communal property. Even after division, the onus of protection fell on the landowner, not the livestock owner. However, she saw the flaws. She announced her plan to eventually require all pigs to be kept in sties. Lutz hesitated, citing the cost of building and maintaining sties, as well as the burden of preparing feed. Melfina countered with a multifaceted argument. First, free-ranging was unsanitary. Second, roaming pigs were vulnerable to wild animals and posed a danger to children. She acknowledged the resistance to breaking custom but was firm. Internally, she likened the free-range system to garbage trucks stopping in her previous life. Without a waste management system, the pigs acting as disposal, sanitation would collapse, especially with a famine looming. She proposed a radical economic incentive. She would take responsibility for building the pigsties. For 3 years after the ban, she would pay a holding fee to the villagers for the pigs they deposited. They retained ownership and could slaughter or breed them, but the lord would subsidize the transition. She clarified the rules to prevent abuse. The holding fee wouldn't be the sole purpose. It was a rotating contract of up to 6 months per pig. If they exceeded the time or limits, they would pay her. Lutz, overwhelmed by the generosity and logic, agreed to spread the word, though he admitted he felt like he was being bullied by her overwhelming preparedness. Melfina pressed on to the next topic, chickens. She wanted to buy their manure. Lutz was flabbergasted that a noble would pay for droppings. Melfina explained the method. She would spread rice husks on the coop floors and buy the mixture at set intervals. She then revealed her intent to build a ranch and barns under direct control to increase chicken numbers, citing their utility and the high phosphorus content of their manure, the best among animal fertilizers. She instructed Marie to arrange for craftsmen to fence the land for the pig farm and build sties immediately, prioritizing this before the heavy rains arrived. Marie noted the urgency, and Melfina confirmed this was the last matter, causing Lutz to slump in relief, only for Melfina to remember one more thing. She inquired about dogs. She had seen none in the village. Lutz explained that wild dogs chasing pigs often came down from the forest, but no villager kept them. If a strong beast appeared, they requested the local magistrate for a hunting party. If it was weak, the village men handled it. Melfina deduced the historical trauma. Feral dogs from failed settlements became dangers to new settlers, leading to a ban on dogs in pioneer villages to prevent overpopulation and rabies. However, Melfina deemed hunting dogs essential for the village's protection. She asked for a hunter, and Lutz identified Godot, an elderly man who still hunted with his kin. Godot was summoned. He was a rugged man who immediately pleaded poverty, stating he could not afford a dog. Melfina offered a deal. She would buy the puppy and pay the boarding fee during its training. Godot, skeptical of the charity, asked what benefit she gained. He offered 10% of his hunting yield. Melfina accepted but emphasized her primary condition. The dog must be trained to obey humans perfectly and defend against crop-raiding pests. She viewed the dog not just as a hunter, but as a guardian for the agricultural revolution she was engineering. Finally, Melfina played her pumpkin strategy. She asked Lutz to plant pumpkins in any fields not yet sown. Lutz resisted, arguing their current fields were sufficient for their own consumption. Melfina countered by promising to buy all the pumpkins harvested from fields where potatoes had been removed. Lutz realized the implication. She was asking farmers to reduce their staple crop, potatoes, in favor of a cash crop. Melfina internally dubbed this the "if there's no hand to sow, eat bread bought with pumpkin money" strategy. She aimed to diversify their caloric sources and create an economy where they could purchase wheat, bread, rather than relying solely on subsistence farming. Even a slight reduction in potato planting was a victory against the monoculture risk. As Melfina departed the village, riding in the cart, she reflected on her past life playing Maria of the Heart Kingdom. She realized that the scenario was mutable. Marie had already deviated from her script by becoming a secretary. Melfina looked at the villagers, the mob characters she had once viewed as mere numbers or background decoration. Now, she saw them as distinct individuals with their own stories. The serfs waved at her as she passed, their demeanor cheerful and energized. They reported that they had finished making the fields all the way to the horizon. One serf marveled that the flat land would soon turn into food. Melfina watched 2 children, Rena and her brother, playing nearby. The sight solidified a growing feeling within her. She resolved that she would not let them starve. Her determination hardened. She was their lord, and she would do whatever was necessary to protect the people of this land from the encroaching doom of the game's timeline. Real summer finally arrives in Anchor after the rainy season, bringing a massive building rush for barns, chicken coops, and drying sheds as 3.5 months fly by. Melfina stands in her fields utterly surprised, admitting that while she hoped for this outcome, she never truly imagined things would turn out this well. Surveying the towering crops, she confesses that she really didn't expect the growth to be this successful. Despite the overwhelming success, she humbly notes that she wouldn't go so far as to call it perfection. A helper points out that despite her modesty, everything is proceeding exactly as Lady Melfina planned. The man stares in silent, sweaty disbelief at the sheer scale of their agricultural victory. Thanks to the plan, land clearing went smoothly, and idle farmers from Anchor Village joined the effort halfway through the season. Construction on the post-harvest drying sheds is underway, but because of the 4-hour travel time, the settlement has been temporarily split to manage the expanded sections. Marie reports that simple huts have been built around the fields and warns that people will be shocked by the volume of the harvest, fearing they might run out of storage space. Her companion notes that getting such a bountiful harvest isn't normal, especially with serfs unfamiliar with corn and Melfina farming for the first time. Melfina observes that the corn is slimmer than in her past life due to a lack of selective breeding, yet packed full inside, acknowledging that raising crops is usually hard for amateurs. She recalls that in the game Maria of the Heart Kingdom, corn could be harvested in under 3 months to save displaced people if the soil was improved, with Anchor being the very stage for Alexis's route. Relieved, she admits she worried that such a bumper crop might be a miracle only Saint Maria could perform. Melfina instructs her team to plant more legumes for winter protein and orders NID to add fertilizer to the harvested fields for replanting. They plan for sales in town and realize they need to manufacture more storage barrels to handle the produce. She continues issuing detailed instructions to ensure the harvest is managed correctly. A report arrives hoping the blight doesn't spread too far, noting that Rad saw similar damage in towns between Anchor and the ducal capital, with some areas already facing mild food shortages. Petitions flood in confirming that Anchor's potato fields are withering one after another. A slow, dark shadow is cast over daily life as people fear rising food prices, though potatoes usually store well enough to prevent immediate starvation. Melfina realizes with a heavy heart that the scenario is indeed following the set path of the game. Someone anxiously asks about the status of the wheat fields. Standing amidst the corn, Melfina feels that this world is somehow distorted. Learning that other areas are currently stable, she decides they have no choice but to watch and wait for a while. She gazes up at the sky, contemplating the strange reality she inhabits. She reflects that even in this fantasy world, amateur knowledge works perfectly and vivid reality spreads all around her as long as she follows the scenario. Marie notices Melfina's distress and asks if she is pale or if something is wrong. Melfina admits that the consistency of the world feels a bit unsettling to her. Steeling herself, she decides that what she has to do is already determined, no matter how unnatural this world feels. She quickly dismisses her worries to Marie, claiming she was just hoping they could harvest safely. Marie reports that the pumpkins seem fine and suggests it was actually good they planted fewer potatoes this year. Melfina reaffirms her goal to secure a solid position and personal assets so she can keep living even if she is eventually driven out. She instructs that the corn must be left to rot longer and plowed in before winter, with the leaves and stalks composted. She believes that the knowledge and experience she gains won't vanish, even if the day comes when she must leave this place. Her ultimate wish is for Marie and the people of Anchor and the surrounding settlements to be happy. She hopes everyone can live happily forever without ever getting hungry. In a different location, a man asks for a report on the west and south sides. The report confirms that potato fields personally inspected were nearly wiped out, and the situation is the same across the entire kingdom. The scene shifts to the grand city of Sorosun. Officials debate the nature of the crisis, noting that since it is a blight and not a curse, the response should fall to the church. The temple claims there is no proof it is a blight and continues investigating curses, leaving the church's stance in question. Lord Auguste dismisses both the temple and the church as useless, citing their long history of being at odds. He explains that they are simply passing the buck, as injuries typically fall to the temple while illnesses fall to the church. An advisor worries about how long their food reserves will last and questions if this is really the time for such jurisdictional disputes. The Duke asks if there have been any deaths by starvation yet and coldly tells his advisor to restrain himself. He states matter-of-factly that foods that don't store will run out by winter and there is no way to secure enough to feed every commoner. He notes that while it's not time to open the ducal granaries, the summer wheat harvest might drop, causing minimal overall issues despite the poor suffering. He muses that if ears of wheat sway before a starving man, it is impossible to expect him not to reach out for them, wishing for a substitute crop. He grimly realizes it is too late to plant anything now. The plan is to cut taxes and enforce priority rations for serfs and the poor through each city steward. He laments that by the time anyone noticed, the crops withered in a blink, preventing any effective countermeasures. He reflects that for those who have hit rock bottom, there is only one place left to go. If the situation turns dire, fortress cities will keep their gates closed from autumn through spring, raising the question of whether relief will actually reach the poor. The Duke remarks that he pities the gate guards who will have to enforce this. Rubbing his temple, he calls the entire situation a massive headache. He thinks about how the Abandoned Duchy is a cold land with low yields, placing heavy stress on whoever governs it to prevent the people from hitting a wall. He bitterly notes that nobles in the capital will have a hard time understanding the crisis since the wheat yield remains normal. He admits that they have no right to throw stones at the capital crowd since they eat white bread too. 5 years after taking the ducal seat, he finally understands why his father always wore such a sour look. He knows that royalty and central nobles rarely act unless tax revenues drop or they feel a direct crisis. He decides they must pick their timing carefully and admits they will likely have to open the ducal stores in the end. Suddenly, he realizes there are no petitions coming from the north. He recalls that the Anchor region, where his lady is staying, is located in that silent north. He speculates that the lack of traffic might have spared it from the blight, realizing he hasn't heard much from that area at all. A memory strikes him regarding his wife. He remembers Cedric sending reports that she was giving the village chief a hard time, but realizes that is a small mercy compared to the silent since. He decides they should confirm the details once, noting that Marie is staying there with the lady as well. He recalls she sent a letter 3 months ago saying she was leaving the ducal house, despite his offer for her to return anytime. He murmurs Marie's name, deep in thought. He realizes that getting no information during a crisis is dangerous and notes he hasn't heard of her since that letter. He commands a knight to send whoever is free to Anchor village to check the situation, as it is still part of the northern region. He declares they cannot let the domain be ruined by the whims of a lady with no experience in governance. His cousin volunteers to dash over on horseback, admitting he'd like to see his cousin's face. The Duke warns him simply not to overdo it. The knight rides off immediately, wiping his mouth as he departs. 2 days after leaving the capital, the knight arrives in a desolate town. He observes starving people collapsing in the streets, realizing the damage gets worse the farther north he goes and that this area is no good either. He thinks sympathetically that the Duke must be hurting over this situation too. A starving child approaches the knight, begging him to spare something to eat. The knight looks down at the desperate, emaciated child in silence. He tosses an apple to the child, warning them to eat it right there or someone will take it from them. The child devours the apple ravenously as the knight watches from his horse. The knight rides away, leaving the child sitting in the dust of the ruined street. Arriving at a village settlement, the knight sighs heavily, remarking that this reality really gets you down. The Duke's inspection team arrives in the area, surprised to find the potato blight absent and the atmosphere completely different from elsewhere. They notice that the awful smell usually associated with the rotting blight is entirely gone. The inspectors wonder if a substitute crop saved the villagers, as they see no one starving to the extreme. Although the potato fields are wiped out, the villagers report that men bring food back when they return. A villager explains that a settlement further north has been recruiting laborers. They hear a new steward was appointed there who pays extra if you work hard, saving their village from ruin. August realizes the villagers are referring to Anchor village at the northern edge. Taking in this information, August simply murmurs that he understands. He deduces they are releasing harvested wheat and beans instead of pocketing them, seeing as there are no potatoes. August predicts this generosity cannot last long since sharing food with neighbors will drain a small domain quickly. He questions the logic of bringing in outside workers and paying them in food during such a crisis. He grimly notes that if the people starve and turn on the Lord, Anchor will be crushed for its misrule. Resolved to intervene, August decides he must give Lady Melfina a stern warning about her reckless management. The next day in Anchor, August announces himself as an inspector from the Duke's house and demands to speak with someone. While waiting on his horse, August spots a familiar figure in the distance. He stares in disbelief, unable to accept that the person he sees is actually there. A villager named Fritz approaches and asks if the knight needs something. Ignoring Fritz, August points to the field and demands to know if beans are planted there. He lectures the farmer that continuous planting without rest will kill the land and hurt future harvests. August condemns the move as foolish, but the farmer replies he cannot defy the Lord's direct order. The farmer reiterates that he is simply following the command given to him. August looks down with a pained expression, realizing the severity of the situation. The farmer informs him that the Lord is currently out inspecting the eastern fields. August asks if following the road straight will lead him to the Lord's manor. He encounters Cedric, remarking that his cousin looks much better than he did back in the capital. August formally introduces himself as August von Carlyle, sent on the Duke's orders to inspect the area. Melfina asks about the newcomer, and Cedric recognizes him immediately. August reveals that he and Cedric are cousins on his mother's side. Melfina politely introduces herself as Melfina von Ordland. August scolds Cedric for leaving for a backwater post without even saying goodbye, admitting he was worried. Cedric dismisses the concern, claiming their relationship isn't close enough for such sentiment. August pivots to business, stating the Duke is worried about the massive potato blight worsening in the north. Melfina bluntly guesses the Duke sent him to ensure she hadn't wiped out her settlers through incompetence. Cedric invites August to come along and inspect the fields personally if he wants to know the truth. Cedric humbly admits that as a lord with no achievements, it is natural for others to worry. A serf cheerfully greets Lady Melfina as the group passes by. August is shocked that a serf would speak so casually to a noble lady from such close range. He wonders what happened to the stiff Cedric he knew, noting the drastic change in demeanor. August brings up the fields where wheat was harvested and beans were immediately planted. He shouts that farming without letting the land rest will destroy the fields themselves. Cedric explains they intended to plant turnips, but lacked the livestock, so they adapted. August insists that wheat sucks nutrients from the soil, making it impossible for the next crop to grow properly. Melfina challenges August, asking if he actually knows why fields are supposed to rest after wheat. She explains that leftover wheat stalks plowed into the earth use up nutrients while breaking down, starving the next crop. She asks August directly if the bean fields he saw looked like they were failing to grow. August reluctantly admits that, strangely enough, the beans seem to be growing just fine. Melfina reveals the solution is simply clearing the leftovers and fertilizing immediately, preventing soil exhaustion. She condescendingly adds that as a knight and not a farmer, it is natural he has never heard of such a thing. August is left speechless, his academic knowledge clashing with their practical success. Melfina discusses crop rotation options like turnips, legumes, or clover with her knowledgeable maid, Marie. Marie notes that overturning the 3-year resting rule would be a revolution in production. Cedric apologizes for his strict secretary, but August is too impressed to mind. Cedric announces they are heading to a serf settlement to check on the harvest. August muses that he might actually know a little more about farming than most people give him credit for. Melfina wonders if they expanded the fields too much, noting they are short on hands for the harvest. A worker thanks them profusely, stating that because of their efforts, no one in Anchor is going hungry. August watches in disbelief, wondering if this compassionate leader is really the same Cedric. He acknowledges that they are feeding the laborers well, agreeing with Marie's assessment. Spotting a tall crop he doesn't recognize, August asks what is growing in the field. He realizes these must be the new fields that were cultivated just this year. Cedric explains that corn has high yields and doesn't suffer the same rotation problems as wheat, making it perfect for summer tillage. August skeptically assumes the crop is meant primarily as feed for livestock. He questions why they cultivated so much, believing people only eat corn during famines and noting they chose quantity over taste. Melfina cheerfully notes it was the most suitable first crop for the poor soil, and they can plant wheat later. Cedric invites August to lunch to prove him wrong with Anchor's delicious corn dishes. Melfina asserts that dismissing corn as untasty is just prejudice and depends entirely on how it is cooked. August accepts the challenge, saying he would be honored to join them. Another worker thanks Lady Melfina for her presence as they prepare to move on. They discuss the shortage of containers for the dried grain and consider having laborers bring empty crates next time. Cedric asks NID, a subordinate, how the harvest is proceeding so far. NID suggests using the current laborers to recruit people from further villages and having them carry food back. Cedric worries that sending workers farther out will add travel time while they are still busy with the first fields. Melfina decides to consult the head of the laborers, noting they would need to pay in advance. She leaves to get documents, asking NID to show August around and explain things in her absence. August teases Cedric about being under the thumb of Anchor's women, but Cedric tells him to shut up. August shifts tone, asking if Cedric wants to know the rough size of the fields and harvest estimates. He decides he is fine staying by Melfina's side to inspect the fields instead, and they set off together. August marvels at the vast cornfields carved from the forest, questioning if this massive area was all opened within a single year. Stunned by the rich harvest from soil previously deemed unfit even for pasture, he demands to know how they transformed the wasteland. The aide credits Lady Melfina entirely when pressed for specific details on the agricultural success. August notes the deflection but pushes for numbers, learning they are currently harvesting around the middle of each field. A map of the cultivated area is presented, surveyed by professionals sent from the Adventurers Guild in Sorasan. August thanks Marie for showing him the drying sheds and surrounding fields as they return from the inspection. The group is welcomed back warmly upon their return to the main area. August remarks on the short days, while the workers express that cleaning up the fields is so rewarding they wish they had more time. The workers agree that while clearing land is fun, the harvest itself offers an entirely different level of satisfaction. Everyone expresses awe at Lady Melfina for opening so many new fields, attributing the success to their collective hard work. Watching the lively serfs, August reflects on a lost child while cautioning the workers not to overdo their labor. A worker praises Melfina for treating them without discrimination, calling her a truly wonderful person. August acknowledges that Melfina's achievements in this region are genuinely remarkable. The people express daily gratitude that a noble so capable chose to stay and lend her strength to them. A man notes that for a duke's lady to leave the main house must have been a huge decision, thanking the knight for his visit. They describe how Melfina provides tools and worries about their health, earning the adoration of all the children. August bitterly muses that those words of gratitude should be directed to Melfina herself, reflecting on her decision to leave. A worker explains that despite her wonderful nature, Melfina is humble and dislikes hearing such praise. August announces they are leaving the subordinate behind, much to the man's shock. The subordinate complains that leaving him behind is a cold move. August explains he must return tomorrow because the ducal house is in chaos and he cannot stay away forever. He worries about the famine hitting right before winter, noting that winter is the worst possible time for trouble in the north. As the wagon moves, the subordinate asks how long August plans to stay away. August instructs him to protect Melfina for the winter, worrying about feeding soldiers for the campaign at Pluina. He suggests it would be best for Melfina to return to the ducal house for winter, doubting the outpost facilities are fit for a noblewoman. Despite the concerns about facilities, his companion agrees that Anchor has become a good land. The subordinate asks if August intends to ask Melfina for food aid to help the main house. August states that once they reach the manor, he will handle the situation. He plans to return to the ducal house first to report to the duke, insisting he must say something himself. 4 days later at the Ordland estate, August prepares to hammer a hard truth into the duke. August presents a popular Anchor dish made of corn flour and stuffing, admitting he was shocked by how incredibly good it tasted. The duke looks at the food with a skeptical and confused expression. The duke argues that while Anchor is successful, clearing forest is hard work and results shouldn't appear so quickly, asking if August is mistaken. August coughs and reports that the fields stretch to the horizon and he saw absolutely no signs of famine. The duke wonders what Melfina is thinking, asserting that planting anything other than wheat, which acts as currency, in new fields is unthinkable. August confirms Anchor could export food, but warns the duke that there is one massive problem despite the potential to minimize famine damage. The duke asks him to speak, and August reveals the problem is a personal grudge Melfina likely holds against him. August bluntly states that declaring he wouldn't give his wife affection was picking a fight, to which the duke coldly agrees. August warns that an unloved wife has no standing and if rumors spread, Melfina becomes a laughingstock in society. The duke counters that he promised he wouldn't neglect her position. August retorts that telling a wife to go wherever she likes without love or children is insane, calling the duke hopeless with women. He adds that a timid woman might have hanged herself the moment he failed to visit on their wedding night. August argues that higher rank doesn't give the duke the right to demand her harvest just because his own lands are failing. He reminds the duke that a lord is an independent ruler and currently, Melfina is the official lord of the Anchor region. The tricky part is that while Duke-supported fields grow wheat, the corn fields were opened by Melfina herself. August warns that handling this poorly could start a war between domains, which the Duke immediately rejects. The Duke insists food should be shared since Anchor was originally ducal land and the house supported the settlers. August presents documents kept by Marie and testimony from Cedric proving the development happened in just the last few months. The Duke feels helpless knowing there is a harvest in the north while people starve, but admits there is no evidence of shady activity. August advises the Duke to approach her as an equal lord and propose buying the crops, as it will hurt less than opening his own granaries. He suggests she might add a premium to the price for her feelings, which is common for any domain. The Duke admits that turning undeveloped land productive so quickly is no accident and they must respect her skill, hoping she won't refuse out of resentment. August adds that the corn goes great with ale and suggests the Duke buy the recipes for the dishes as well. The Duke resigns himself to the fact that they really don't have a choice in the matter. Instead of sending an envoy, the Duke decides to go negotiate personally and buy the recipes himself. He wants to see the bountiful fields with his own eyes, not because he doubts the report, but to witness the change. He decides to taste the food himself and hands oversight of civil officials to Rufus temporarily. The Duke hopes seeing that sight might change something within him, as constant grim reports are wearing him down. August remarks that Rufus is getting old, so the Duke should go easy on him. Looking at the sky, August comments that Melfina will surely be happy if the Duke visits her. 5 days later, the party arrives in the Anchor region. The knights are awestruck by the landscape, exclaiming that it is incredible. The Duke is stunned, noting the beauty is nothing like the devastation he saw on the way and far exceeds the reports. He gazes at the cornfields and silently admits to himself that the view is beautiful. A worker recognizes August and asks if he is back again already. August complains that NID could sound happier to see him, while NID informs them Melfina is at the manor today. The Duke calls out to the workers, asking if anyone knows where the lady of the house is. A worker apologizes for the interruption but says it's the perfect time because Marie is experimenting with a new dish. The Duke observes the workers carrying corn, realizing he has never seen peasants this lively before. August laughs that Melfina is often out inspecting fields, noting it's good the Duke can talk to her properly today. August explains that Melfina asks everyone to call her by name rather than titles, which strikes the Duke as hearing a peasant address a noble too casually. The Duke recalls she is the daughter of the Crawford Viscount family from the southern granary and thought her request for land was strange. He admits that Melfina von Crawford really is an unconventional lady. He acknowledges she left the ducal house and achieved all this in 4 months, defying all common sense. Reflecting on the political marriage between the food-poor North and the fertile but volatile South, he admits the alliance made perfect sense. He confesses he never thought he needed a partner in private life and viewed the marriage solely as signing a contract. He expected a nightmare of a capital-raised noblewoman meddling in his house, so he planned to give her no authority. Staring at the manor, he seriously wonders what kind of woman he actually married. The Duke arrives at the stone manor house where Melfina is waiting. Melfina stands before the Duke and August with a silent, stunned expression. August cheerfully remarks that uninvited guests always show up when one is busy. Melfina asks if they came just for lunch, pointing out that August left only 5 days ago, while August claims he hasn't stopped thinking about the food. With no diner in Anchor, Melfina sighs about the inconvenience but agrees to make 3 servings, joking that she should charge them. August pleads his case, stating he has been riding since dawn and is absolutely starving. Melfina agrees to feed them, inviting them to join the meal they were about to eat. August whispers that averaging the Duke's coldness and Melfina's warmth would make a perfect couple, urging the Duke to treat this as a presentation. Melfina instructs Marie to immediately ask the staff to increase the lunch portions. The Duke notices a woman he does not recognize and demands his subordinate identify her. Melfina boldly confronts the Duke, asking if he has completely forgotten her face. The 3 knights express disbelief that a woman from the Duke's own house could have so much free time. She stands before them, revealed clearly as Lady Melfina. The Duke dismisses her presence, telling her to inspect things or do whatever she likes until lunch is ready. Melfina questions the knight's audacity in addressing her by name without proper title. The Duke suddenly realizes he forgot he has been married to her for about 4 months. Melfina laughs off the strangeness of marrying a stranger and admits she can be mean about it. The Duke remarks that August's interest was inevitable once he saw the bountiful fields. A young knight realizes this situation might work in his favor regarding a specific presentation. Melfina astutely guesses that the men want to know exactly how the food is made. She invites the knights inside the small dining room while relegating everyone else to the courtyard. The knight insists they are fine eating outside since the weather is perfect for a picnic. He compliments Lady Melfina for getting straight to the point without hesitation. Melfina decides to demonstrate the cooking process personally since they do not keep a food taster. The Duke questions the propriety of cooking in front of them, but Melfina ignores his concern. She explains that in this era, recipes and techniques are personal assets that cooks normally keep secret. Melfina commands Eli and Marie to begin preparing, declaring her intent to spread this flatbread as home cooking. The maids immediately agree to her orders without question. The kitchen staff moves with efficiency, chopping vegetables and frying meat in the pan. Melfina takes charge of the dough while delegating the meat and vegetable preparation to her assistants. It is revealed that Eli grew up in a merchant family and knows household management because her mother was a maid. The Duke learns that Eli came from a peasant village and has become a huge help to the household. With so few women in the manor, Eli is considered invaluable to their operations. Melfina orders the knight to wash his hands and put on an apron, noting that 2 pieces of dough are enough. She challenges him to try cooking himself, noting that just watching is boring. The knight observes that the soap provided is different from what is sold in the south. He confirms with Melfina that this is the standard soap used in the household. He holds the bar of soap, examining its texture and quality in silence. Melfina explains that the yellow powder is cornmeal and checks if he has finished washing up. He is told not to keep Lady Melfina waiting and admits his curiosity has been piqued. Melfina explains that corn is viewed as livestock feed, so she hides its original form to remove the aversion. She details the process of drying the corn, removing the kernels, and grinding them into flour. Melfina thanks Cedric for setting up the cooking equipment in the room. She demonstrates the recipe by adding water, salt, and a little oil to the flour before kneading it well. Melfina introduces a custom silver press she commissioned to make flattening the dough easier. She demonstrates how to place the rolled dough into the press and flatten it instantly. She explains that letting the dough rest prevents cracking and allows the texture to improve. Melfina instructs Marie to cook the dough just until browned, warning that overcooking destroys the texture. The knight eagerly asks Lady Melfina if he can try using the press himself. He presses the dough with excitement and agrees to cook it himself immediately after. Melfina praises his first attempt and asks if he has prior cooking experience. He reveals he learned the basics of service and cooking while working as a squire for knights. Melfina presents the fillings, which consist of grilled meat and fresh vegetables. She watches with satisfaction as he understands the assembly process. Melfina directs Marie to add the special sauce, explaining it draws out moisture and adds a peppery flavor. The knight enjoys the cooking process and jokingly asks for a job, while Melfina names the dish a taco. He jokes about working for a beautiful owner, but Melfina counters that she would rather invest in his restaurant. Marie serves the finished dish to the Duke, setting the plate down with a clink. The Duke acknowledges Marie, noting that it has been a long time since they spoke. The dining room falls silent as the focus shifts to the food on the table. Marie apologizes for the delayed greeting and assures him she is doing well thanks to him. Melfina observes the interaction, thinking that the 2 half-siblings are acting awfully distant. The Duke takes a bite of the taco as Melfina urges him to help himself. He admits the food is good, noting the flavor is different from white bread but still enjoyable. The Duke calculates the strategic value, realizing it is filling, hygienic, and suitable for military rations. Marie places a second variation of the dish on the table for them to try. The Duke observes that this version contains boiled eggs and chicken, realizing the versatility of the fillings. Melfina asserts that the sauce is the key element that elevates the entire dish. She explains that while white sauce is nice, the spicy tangy sauce pairs perfectly with corn flatbread. She adds that the dish is good even without sauce if the meat is salted more heavily. Melfina silently muses that ketchup and mayonnaise would likely work well in this world too. The Duke speaks up quietly to get her attention. He agrees that the salty, savory flavor would go excellently with ale. The Duke formally offers to purchase the recipe for both the corn flatbread and the sauce. Melfina accepts but insists on negotiating a proper price to protect the farmers who are being pushed hard. The Duke invites her to name her terms as she prepares to make her demand. Melfina shocks the men by demanding 1 sack of wheat for every sack of corn.